Recently, we were honored to work with 16-year-old Bora Hurst in Florida. Bora swims all 4 strokes, but is a specialist in breaststroke. His goal is to break a minute in the 100-yard breaststroke next season in high school. To get a more in-depth look into his breaststroke technique, we performed a velocity meter study, measuring his velocity, acceleration, and deceleration synchronized with his video. The VM study, with all of the data derived from it, enables us to accurately identify and to quantitate Bora's mistakes in breaststroke technique. Once we perform and analyze each study, we then spend time online with the client explaining our findings and record the session. Hey Bora, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, nice to see you again, man. You've gotten bigger since I saw you last time, I think.
Thank you.
You keep growing. Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about, and I want to focus in on one aspect that we tested in the Keys when you were down with the velocity meter, and that was the breaststroke pulling motion. That's again another controversial area that a lot of coaches, I think, don't fully understand. And what brought this to my attention really was watching arguably the 2 greatest breaststrokers in the world today, which are Adam Peaty in the men's, no question there, and Lily King on the women, really reinventing the breaststroke technique. But what both of them do a little bit more than what others do is pull what I call the loop pull, pulling wide and narrow, kind of making this elliptical pull, really lifting themselves tremendously out of the water, elevating their shoulders, and that enables them to really couple well, which the coupling motions we talked about are the head coming down, the body coming down, timed with that kicking propulsion really catapults them forward, and they get a lot out of that. So I think that wider pull gives them an advantage to be able to do that, to get up so high as they do. And then coming down is on them, but the wider pull, increases their lift without question. What we didn't know is, does it also increase their propulsion from the pull? And so that's where the study really came in. And you were the second person we tested on this, but I want to bring up your data at this point. So what I'm going to share the screen here. This is your narrow pull. We'll start with this, and then we'll go through the wide pull. And I'd like to point out that this was your normal pulling motion, right? This was what you normally would do. You can see yourself come into the screen, and there you are on the left. And what I mean by a narrow pull, my guess is the hands are just a little bit outside the elbows here. And some even keep the hands even narrower than that, never getting them outside the elbows. And then you come forward. But since we're first analyzing one thing, we can take one thing at a time. And here again, I like the fact that your fingers are separated during the out sweep. We now go into the propulsion phase, and you can see down below on the orange graph down here, right at this moment is when you peak out on your force. This is the maximum propulsion force. The hands are now pointing down and moving straight backward. And it's very short-lived. In the breaststroke, the propulsion for the pull is really quick. Same with the kick, but it's pretty much over. Now you're decelerating already, and the hands stop moving backward. They then come together, what we call the release phase, and then a strike phase. Now in your case, this is something I have to point out right away. If you're moving forward in the water, the water is 800 times denser than air. You don't really want your hands to be moving forward in water. You want to get them up on top of the water, at least part of them, and get those hands to come above the surface. And you do that in either case. So that's one of the bad things, and that sends your velocity down. That's part of the reason your velocity goes almost to zero. And it does in most cases here, but this is not helping you, okay, on the recovery. So what I call the strike phase, you come forward, you now turn the palms down, which is correct, getting into what is supposed to be racing streamline, but those elbows should be straight. They shouldn't be bent like that. You got to pull the shoulders out of the socket, hyperextend the shoulder forward, and reach down and pull further. Really too much of a vacation here. You got to be out of your comfort zone. All right. Again, we look at that pulling motion. Fingers begin to separate. Good. Go into propulsion. Narrower pull than what we asked for because that's your normal. Okay. Now we'll go to the next one. So this is your wide pull. Okay. We like to see the hands go well outside the elbows on the pulling motion. Remember, it's what we call a loop pull. So it goes wide, but it doesn't go very deep. In other words, you're not pulling back very far. So again, same issue coming forward with those hands below the water instead of above. You turn down here. You a little better job in this case of extending the shoulder forward. Now you separate the hands, the thumb and the fingers, which is good. There's your out sweep. But what I see on this video-wise is I don't see a lot of difference. I don't see you really out sweeping longer, much longer than you did on your narrow pull. So one of my, and you'll see in the data, there's not a whole lot of difference. One of my rationales or reasons for seeing that, I think, is there's really not a lot of difference in what you're actually doing here. So I don't think you were pulling as wide as we really wanted you to. And in your defense, you'd never done that before. So I don't think that that's something you were used to. Again, we get another visual of your pulling motion. Hand just barely outside, a little bit further out, a little bit further, but not a whole lot further out than you did before, okay? All right, so let's come back to that video in a second. And let's look at, and when we look at your breaststroke, we look at a lot of different aspects of it. We look at your trough velocity for your before your pull. That's the slowest velocity you're going to get before you start your pull. Then the peak velocity after the pull. And by the way, I want to commend you on getting pretty good peaks. You have a pretty nice pull for your age, particularly. The difference between these two, which we call the delta PT, is over 1 meter per second increase in speed from your pull alone. And we know this is only because of your pull, because your kick and your pull are going on independently in breaststroke. There's no kick going on when you're pulling and no pull going on when you're kicking. We also look at your trough before the kick and your trough or your peak after the kick. Again, nice kicking propulsion, and you have good breaststroke tools. You have good hip flexibility, nice pronation, and strong legs. To get that kind of propulsion is really a good thing. Then we look at how much velocity do you lose after your peak propulsion from this average of 2.41 meters. Now you're going to go into a phase before you do your next pull, and you're losing 49% of your speed before you get the speed back up from the pull. That's excessive, and that's one of the things we have to fix this, because it doesn't matter if you get this great velocity here and then you lose it, half of it, before you do the pull, then you're really coming way down here too low, and that's what's happening. This we expect. We expect everyone to go pretty close to zero. You might not go quite so low when you make the changes we're going to tell you about here, but you certainly aren't going to go as low here either when we make the changes we're talking about. So, all right, so what did we find? The bottom line, I'm going to jump to the bottom line, and that is this. Which way are you faster? Well, it turns out that, and we'll look at all the data in a second, but your 1.29 meter per second speed, and I'm only measuring your breaststroke speed. I'm not measuring the speed off the wall or the pull-out speed. This is breaststroke only, 1.929 meter per second. Here on the wide pull, 1.31. You say, okay, that's not a whole lot of difference. That's 0.02 meters per second. Okay, well, what does that translate to in a race? Well, in a 60-second race, like you will have in 100, that's 1.2 meters of distance. That's about 4 feet further ahead you would be with a wide pull than the narrow pull. And I was talking to Josh about this just a few minutes ago, and he said he not only got more lift, he got more speed as a result of doing this, and you do too. His probably more dramatic than yours, but still, I'll take that 4 feet. And then 200, that's 8 feet. That's even more substantial. So it doesn't look like much, but it is enough. It's enough to win or lose a race for sure. Okay. Now let's look at the data, because this really is important. And what did we look at to compare the narrow pull and the wide pull? Well, we looked at your average peak accelerations from the pull, and it turns out you are actually a little bit more. This surprised me. I didn't expect this. I expected the wide pull to give you more acceleration. Acceleration is not exactly the same as, but it's very closely related to propulsion. So it doesn't look like you're getting more propulsion from the wider pull. Looks like it's a little more from the narrow pull. The peak velocity after the pull was actually greater with the narrow pull than it was with the wider pull. Again, surprising to me. I didn't expect that, but I only report what I find. I don't report what I like to see. I report what actually happened. The trough velocity was higher, and this is important here with the wider pull. And that's really where the difference comes in, because your trough means you're not slowing down as much as you did with the narrow pull. And again, here's your average speed here, 1.29, your average speed here, 1.31. Really has to do with how far you're slowing, not how fast you're getting at the highest points, but how slow you're getting at the slowest points. And when we looked at velocity loss, 49% here with the narrow pull after the kick, 46% loss of velocity with the wider pull after the kick. Both of which, by the way, are too high. What I would like to see is this around 25 to 30%, which is a big difference. That's still less here with the wider pull. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I'll come back to this, we now measure your kicking cycle time. That's the time between your peak force of your pull and your peak force of your kick. And this is huge, because this number needs to be at 0.50 or less in order to couple well with a kick. And if it's 0.55 and 0.56, which it is in your case, that means you're not capturing the kinetic energy of the body and the head coming down and augmenting the force of your kick, which means we're losing out on an opportunity. And when I look at the fastest swimmers in the world, like Adam Peaty and like Lily King and Rebecca Soni, and I was able to measure Rebecca, I've never measured the other two. My guess is that their time here is around 0.50 or even under. In other words, as Ray Luce said about Lily, when I asked him why she was so good, he said lightning fast legs. To be able to make that kick happen, getting into propulsion mode in 0.05 less seconds or more makes a difference. It's like you got to the dock 5 minutes late and the boat left, and that's what's happening here. So in summary, there wasn't as much difference as I would have liked to have seen here. In fact, it actually weighed more toward, in some respects, toward the narrower pull, but the trough and the percentage of loss of velocity weighed toward the wider pull. And the bottom line is that the wider pull was better. Now let's go back to the video, and I want to show you the other things that I measured or I found. But before I do that, Bora, what are your thoughts about wide versus narrow pull? How did that feel initially? Have you continued using it? Any further thoughts on?
Yeah, I have. After this, I really put a focus and emphasis on trying to fix my pull and getting it a lot better. And I do feel like I've improved a little bit since this video. And I've made sure to keep my my arms between my shoulders, so I'm not out sweeping too far. But it does feel a lot faster when I do the wide pull.
Good. Okay. And I think, again, at some point we'll measure it again. One of the disadvantages of taking a new technique that you've never tried before and say, okay, I'm going to test you with this technique, you don't always do it right. And I don't know that you did it as well as I would have liked here. But the next time we test you, I do think we can see probably a wider pulling motion. And when you look at Adam, his arms are straight out to the sides. I mean, almost the fingers are almost touching the lane markers on each side. It's incredibly wide, fast, but it's fast through, but he's really pulling wide. All right, so now let's go back to your video, and I want to point out the things that I would like to see you change. Okay, so let's start with the kick. When you draw your knees up, I'm going to go to the next one because there's a lot of bubbles there. Watch when you draw your thighs forward. We all have to do that. We mentioned, elevating, getting the hands over the top of the surface. And one thing that's important is that you don't just elevate your arms to do that, that you bring your shoulders as high as you can, and with it come the hands. You don't want to just bring your arms up. You really want to bring your shoulders up and let the arms come with it so that you're driving those hands straight forward, almost straight forward, as opposed to lifting and pulling them up over a high hurdle or something like that. That's not what you want to do. You want to just get those shoulders up and out of the water higher, and at least part of that hand should be above the surface, not completely below. Now look at where you pull your thighs up, okay? You can see the angle here, and I measured this with a protractor, is just a slight bit over 90 degrees. 90 degrees. Where are the elite athletes? They need to pull them up. But remember, the farther you pull them up, the longer it's going to take you to get them through that cycle, right? So we see between 100 and 120 degrees. You're about 90, a little over 90 here. Let me just show you Josh, because Josh, who's your teammate, when he did this, just to give you an idea what his breaststroke looked like. Okay, so just as a comparison, Josh was a little over 100, not much, but just you can see almost side by side. In fact, I'll bring them side by side so you can. Now watch him bring his thighs up and look at the angle. Okay, that's as far as it gets for him right there. Let's compare that with you. So you can see that angle here and Josh's angle. Doesn't look like much, does it? But it is. It's actually about 10 degrees. So he's a little over 100, you're a little over 90. And that's just too far up. Okay, so that's rule number one. You don't have enough time to get to, because what happens by the time you get into propulsion mode, right there in the bottom, you can see that's where your peak kicking force is happening. Your body's already been in the water. Basically, it's not moving at this point. If we could, each click is 0.02 seconds. So if I can back up let's go backward, 2, 3 clicks. Now you see, if that's where your peak propulsion occurred, you can see the body is crashing right at this moment into the water. The kinetic energy here is much greater than it is just 3 clicks later, because the body doesn't move much at this point. So you basically miss the boat. The timing was right. And it has to do with the leg speed. All right, so that's thing number 2. So we got the hands elevating the shoulders, getting the hands above water. Thing number 3 is, what do you do with your legs at the end of your kick? And you go from a peak speed right there, and then all of a sudden, within hundredths of a second, you're down to here, and then you even go further down than that to here. And that's that 49% loss of speed. Why is that happening? Well, it's happening here because your legs are hanging and your feet are hanging, both of which are doing horrible things to your speed. I mean, this foot hanging is the worst thing that can happen. So you have to finish your kick with those heels higher and those toes pointed, and you won't lose quite as much speed here. You get a little bit of uptick from the upward motion of your leg. That's an up kick. And then you lose it again back down to here, again, because those feet are still hanging down. So the up kick got it back up a little bit, and also some of that's artifact because you're flexing your hip, but you're still too slow. You've lost way too much speed. The other thing I don't like, which is also contributing to your loss of speed, is when you come down with your chin. Okay, you do a pretty good job. Okay, so now you're coming down. I'll take it back here. Okay, your head hits the water. You want your chin to touch your chest. It's not touching quite. It needs to be further down. But watch what happens. Even if it's close, I'd be okay with it. It's not. I mean, it's okay, but it could be closer. You need to touch that chin down. You don't want any of your cap sticking out right here. You want those arms extended straight forward, palms down, fingers squeezed together, and the chin on your chest. But here's where you really mess up. You lift that head right away. Okay, now your chin is really coming off your chest. But even worse, that isn't hurting you. This is up here, the cap sticking out. And it just keeps popping up higher and higher and higher. So right about here, when your hands are separating on the outsweep, is when that the chin should actually be leaving your chest. And what you would do is avoid a lot of your loss of speed is coming from here at the end, and it's coming from here at the beginning, and maybe not quite a full hyperextension of your shoulder here. But you got to keep that chin down longer. If we can cut this 49% down to 30% or something like that, and then you give us your pull is actually going to be higher speed than your kick, which is, that's what we see with some of the great pulling swimmers like E Infinity. His pull actually goes, he's a very strong puller, higher than his kick. You've got both. You've got good pull and you've got good kick, but you just have too low a trough here and too low a trough here. All right, so bottom line is keep the wide pull up, keep working on it, fix the end of your kick, keep your chin on your chest longer and really plaster it, Velcro it to your chest and keep it there until you start to outsweep, then lift it up and then pull wider with those hands. Elevate your shoulder wider. And by pulling wider, you're going to get your shoulders up higher because you have all that lift. It's like lifting yourself out of the pool. And you want to get your shoulders as high as you can. And then by doing that, you want to get the hands to come up above the water, not stay below on your way forward. All right?
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of good information, but I do like the wide pull. Josh was just telling me he dropped his time at juniors by like 2 seconds when he went to wide pull, and he was out a second and a half faster than he was at the 50 than he'd ever been before. So I do think it's the right thing to teach. I was expecting to see a bigger difference in the data, didn't show it, but the speed did show some improvement, and the troughs did show some improvement with a wider pull. I bet you the next time we check you, and if you pull a little bit wider, we will actually see more propulsion from that pulling motion too. But I right now I can't. That's just speculation. I can't prove that. Great. Any other questions?
I think that was it. That was amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great to see you. I'll send you the video recording and all the data, and you can look at it in the whole video. But give my best to your mom and dad. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Keep working. Talk to you soon. Stay safe.
All right.